One television series I've always wanted to cover on this channel is HBO's deconstructive fantasy epic Game of Thrones, and now that the final season has wrapped, I thought it would be a good time to finally take a stab at it. Now, there are many reasons why everyone fell in love with this show, from the empathetic characters, to the big portrayals, the production design, the acting, and the fully realized world of Westeros. However, if I were to single out the element that distinguishes Game of Thrones the most from every modern television and film production, it would be Within the 8 seasons of Game of Thrones are some of the best large-scale battles since the iconic Lord of the Rings trilogy. From the early season battles of Neil Marshall to the later season battles done by Game of Thrones superstar Miguel Sapochnik, action storytelling became a very key part of the series' DNA. By season 4, audiences can expect a massive large-scale conflict within each season that would top whatever was playing at their local multiplex. Honestly, I could do a whole video on how the battle storytelling has evolved through each season, from the classical approach to Blackwater Bay to the heightened visceral filmmaking of the Battle of the Bastards. These battles were more than just showstoppers, they were changing the language of action filmmaking. With their final season, Thrones embraced the mantra of go big or go home, with 2 of their 6 final episodes housing the largest battles in the show's history. Episodes 3 and 5, titled The Long Night and The Bells respectively, are monumental in their scope and production for HBO. Both episodes, directed by Sapochnik, clock in as the first and third longest episodes in the show's run. The Long Night in particular holds the distinction of being the longest battle in film, yes film, history. At 82 minutes, this episode is basically a film to itself. Its runtime is as long as a theatrically released Toy Story. HBO spared no expense for this episode. However, bigger doesn't always mean better. As those of you who watch the show will know, Game of Thrones' epic final season was also its most divisive, with many complaints being leveled at its character consistency and rushed pacing. Using the metrics provided by Rotten Tomatoes, we can see that The Long Night received mixed reviews from critics and audiences, and was also the turning point towards the scrutinized last half of the season, with The Bells receiving the worst reviews in the show's history. Battles in storytelling are really important. They are the crescendos to their narratives, the moments where the characters find their purpose and discover who they are. These battles are the moments where Game of Thrones defined its identity. Game of Thrones' battles still exist in the larger context of fantasy battle storytelling, and to some degree, they are built by the foundation laid out by Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. For The Long Night, Helm's Deep was a big inspiration for Sapochnik on how to film a large-scale battle and keep it coherent and entertaining. Now, Helm's Deep is a high bar to reach, and it's a bar that Jackson completely whiffed on when adapting the Hobbit prequels. Last year, I did a deep dive on the language of battle storytelling and how the Battle of the Five Armies completely missed the mark. Today, I want to continue that series by applying that criteria to Game of Thrones' controversial final battles. The successes and failures of these episodes can teach us a lot about these stories and why they matter. Now, if you haven't already done so, I highly recommend watching my analysis on The Hobbit for proper context. And with that out of the way, let's discover the missed opportunities of The Long Night. Before we begin, I want to give a big thanks to this episode's sponsor, Skillshare. Now, despite my issues with Game of Thrones' 8th season, which I'll bring up in this video, I'm still very impressed at how they crafted flawless spectacle on a fraction of the budget of many of this summer's blockbusters. Crafting visuals that look more expensive than they are is one of the most valuable skills a filmmaker can have. If you want to make videos that look incredibly cinematic, Skillshare offers dozens of courses that will sharpen your filmmaking mind. 2 classes I've enrolled in on this site are DIY Cinematography, Make Your Video Look Like a Movie, and Indie Filmmaking, Get the Blockbuster Look on a DIY Budget. As a creator, I'm always looking to improve my craft, and whatever your craft is, Skillshare offers thousands of classes at a very low cost, with an annual subscription that's less than $10 per month. Because Skillshare is sponsoring this video, you can sign up with the link in the description and get a 2-month free trial. Whatever your craft is, Skillshare is perfect to keep you thinking and learning. And now, on with the show. Perhaps the best place to start with this episode is with the most widespread complaint viewers had when it aired, which was the overly dark lighting. Many fantasy battles are about light versus darkness, and this episode takes that idea to its extreme conclusion, having its heroes fight in the middle of the night against a storm-covered army of ice zombies. Now, obfuscation is very much a part of the battle. Many characters get lost and confused, making it difficult to carry out their missions.
She can't see us!
But on the other hand, because of the lower light levels, for much of the battle it becomes incredibly difficult to actually see what is happening. A good chunk of this battle takes place in absolute darkness, and if you aren't watching this episode from its raw digital file or a properly calibrated 4K TV, much of these images become compressed to the point where they're ineligible. Despite being a fantasy setting, Thrones has always strived to be authentic to reality and history, and this mentality is reflected in their lighting methods. To maintain this grounded look, the show tends to rely on natural light, whether it be sunlight or candles, to capture the atmosphere. This approach was used intensely during the Long Night. Cinematographer Fabian Wagner explained, "Personally, I don't have to always see what's going on because it's more about the emotional impact. I wanted to evolve the lighting, to make the storytelling of the lighting evolve with the storytelling of the characters. We'd seen so many battle scenes over the years. To make it truly impactful and to care for the characters, you have to find a unique way of portraying the story." This darker tone certainly set it apart from other battles of this series. The creative team describes this episode as survival horror, which is most apparent when Arya is fending for her life inside the castle. In theory, I think this approach works rather well, how any idea of control is taken away from the characters and subsequently the viewers. The opening charge of the Dothraki is perhaps the best moment that portrays this, with a roaring fiery charge quietly diminishing in the distance. Also, some of these visuals that play with light versus darkness are absolutely stunning. However, as I see it, there are two major issues that arise with this approach. For one, it becomes rather difficult during the action scenes to actually tell who we're following. Many of these shots are so busy with the characters being lit in silhouette that by the time we realize who we're following, let alone what they're doing, the battle has already moved on to another character and we repeat this process. In their attempts to establish tone and atmosphere, the filmmakers inadvertently sacrificed character drama. This battle was heavily inspired by the Battle of Helm's Deep, and you really feel that in the episode's DNA, from the characters fighting the wights off the wall to the sense of dread felt in the crypts. However, the place where they steer the furthest from Helm's Deep is in the lighting. Helm's Deep was heavily backlit with an artificial beaming white light meant to come from the moon. This white light, which is often projected behind the actors, highlights them and makes them stand out in the frame. The color correction process created a monochromatic blue hue to represent night. The simplicity of this look is there so that we can easily follow the characters, their actions, and the flow of the battle. Nerdwriter has a video which covers this, and another film that uses a more extreme version of this approach is Mad Max Fury Road. For the night sections of Fury Road, they shot these scenes during the day and then color corrected them blue in post. It's almost the anti-Long Night. They thumbed their nose at naturalism to preserve clarity and character. Now you can shoot giant-scale action scenes at night and still maintain a naturalistic approach. You can even shoot out-of-control action scenes where things fall into chaos and still maintain a naturalistic approach. The biggest piece of evidence is Game of Thrones' other battles. If you look at the earlier nighttime battles done by Neil Marshall, not only do they have far less fighting, but they also have simplified geographical arenas and action goals tied to those arenas that ground the battles. They also have far fewer characters to follow, which becomes the Long Night's second major problem, and that's the abundance of characters. Simply put, there are way too many characters to track within this action scene, especially with a chaotic filmmaking style. The episode does try to reconcile this by pairing up its characters, such as Jaime, Pod, and Brienne, but with the amount of time it switches gears, there really isn't anything to anchor us in this episode. The biggest thing that sells the chaos in Sapochnik's other battles is how they firmly ground us in Jon Snow's point of view. Just think back to the iconic minute-long shot of Jon fighting in the Battle of the Bastards. How the camera stays centered on Jon as he reacts to things coming at him, both in and out of the frame. Actions and fights are interrupted by sudden horses and arrows. By holding the shot longer, the audience is given a stronger sense of disorientation. The elongated periods of the Long Night, where we follow a single point of view or action, are easily its most impactful, such as the Hound making his way through the castle to save Arya, or Jon Snow charging through the battle chasing after the Night King. There's a really great moment where Jon makes his way through the Ward of Winterfell, and he passes by all of his friends fighting for their lives en route to Bran. To me, this is far more impactful than all the other times this episode cuts back to these characters, and that's because it links us to Jon's actions and experience. Through Jon, we see the chaos that the others are experiencing, and we see that Jon can't help them since he has a greater mission at hand. Without moments like this, without clear actions and clear character emotions, the battle just becomes a bunch of people killing zombies for 80 minutes. Now this segment has been all about presentation, how the episode shows, or doesn't, how our characters fight the dead and attempt to save Westeros. Well, now it's time to talk about how they actually do it. Pretty much all great drama revolves around actions and reactions. A character comes to save the world. The world reacts to that character. The world conspires against their new savior. The savior changes their approach. Action, reaction. Similarly, every great battle scene is built on a foundation of actions and reactions. Characters come in with a plan to win the conflict. As things fail to go according to plan, they react and change their approach. For the 700th time, let's take a look at Helm's Deep because why not? It's a perfect scene. Theoden's army guard the walls of the castle to prevent the Uruk-hai from killing his people. Saruman's army comes prepared, first with ladders which the elves must fend off, then with a bomb that blows a hole in the wall, sending the characters across the field. Aragorn, Gimli, and the elves defend this hole as the Uruk-hai begin to breach the front door. Aragorn and his army retreats and make their way to the upper castle. With the aid of Gimli, he defends the bottlenecked causeway while Theoden's soldiers board up the damaged door. After being rescued by Legolas, Aragorn, Theoden, Gimli, and the remaining soldiers retreat inside the castle and board up the last line of defense. Having nowhere left to go, the remaining soldiers ride out to fight the Uruk-hai head-on, and through a set of reinforcements provided by Gandalf, Theoden is able to fight back Saruman's army and cement himself as an active part in the war for Middle-earth. This is as clear of a conflict as any battle can get. It's pure cause and effect, how the safety of Helm's Deep is destroyed by Saruman's strategy. How Saruman puts Theoden and Aragorn in reactive positions, forcing them to fight at sensitive points while his army continues to make ground. It's only when Theoden and Aragorn stop reacting and change their tactics from defending to confronting, i.e. the theme, that they effectively fight back and win the day. Now that's the Lord of the Rings romanticized version of battles, and Game of Thrones plays by other rules. Let's take a look at the Battle of the Bastards, which executes just as interesting a spin on action and reaction. Just before the battle, Jon and his men devise a strategy to lure Ramsay towards him and beat them away from the castle. Sansa warns Jon that,
"You think he's going to fall into your trap? He won't. He's the one who lays traps."
The dynamic between Jon and Ramsay is at the center of this battle, specifically how Ramsay manipulates Jon to get what he wants. The same tricks Ramsay pulls on Jon, the filmmakers pull on the audience, giving us the hope that Jon can rescue Rickon, only to kill him when he's moments from being saved. Through this action, Ramsay disrupts Jon's plan, putting him in a death trap. The most important part about this maneuver is how it robs Jon of his agency. Ramsay maintains control on the battlefield while Jon is in the thick of it, reacting to every arrow and soldier that comes his way. Moments of rescue such as Davos sending the charge or Sansa burning the veil are only known to him when they're right before him, the latter of which happening largely because Sansa could anticipate Ramsay's actions. This is all that the battle comes down to. Actions, reactions, anticipation. Jon failed to anticipate Ramsay's actions and he paid for it, having to fight for his life in Ramsay's self-constructed hellscape. The element that both Helm's Deep and Battle of the Bastards share that really brings their battles to life is that they create defined expectations that a scene can play up and undermine. By linking these expectations to character decisions and philosophies, these battles become compelling drama. Let's bring things back to the Long Night. What are the expectations established before the battle, and how do they evolve throughout the attack? In the episode prior, all the major players assemble for a war council where they discuss their battle plan. The armies will defend from outside the castle, as Bran will be used as bait for the Night King in the Godswood. They establish how Davos will signal for the dragons to light the trench, and that Daenerys, Jon, and the two dragons will hang back to protect Bran and kill the Night King. Of course, there are other things happening in the battle, such as Theon defending Bran, or Tyrion being ordered to stay safe in the crypts. But I think this sums up the gist of their battle plan. Just gonna start with it because everyone else has already mentioned it. The battle plans here are pretty nonsensical. Sandwiching the armies between the dead and the trench is a recipe for disaster, which it becomes. Because of the poor moves early on, such as Jon charging the Whites when the plan was to stay close to Bran, or the army starting outside the castle only to immediately retreat after the first clash, the characters are forced into reactive positions. Whereas in Bastards the mistakes were due to Jon's love for his brother, here it's just poor strategy through and through. Jon and Daenerys get lost in the Night King's blizzard, and Grey Worm is forced to doom a portion of his army in order to protect the retreat. Now, the characters losing their strategy and resorting to fight-or-flight instincts seems like a natural progression. After all, the Night King and his army are this metaphorical imposing death. They aren't something you can outthink or outmaneuver. However, the battle isn't done justice with its shoddy initial battle plan. The battle could have worked so much better if they had started with the trench lit up and Westeros' largest army behind it. It also would have saved about 20 minutes. Like Helm's Deep, we could see the Night King overwhelm their defenses through pure numbers. The battle could begin with the dragons lighting up a massive fire that imbues our heroes with clarity and hope, but as the battle rages on, the fire would dwindle, with characters becoming overwhelmed by the darkness. A clearer sense of cause and effect wouldn't just make the battle more logical, it would also create a stronger central metaphor. All that said, I still think there is some really great stuff in here. How Theon and Jorah are given heroic and redemptive deaths, how the Hound becomes overwhelmed by the fire only to snap out of it to save Arya, or how characters like Melisandre find order amidst the chaos. I even really like how the crypt comes to life to terrorize all the non-fighters. This is an episode about characters confronting death, deciding who they are or at least who they want to be remembered by. The episode can't have an elegant flow because that's not this conflict. It's blunt, it's terrifying. If anything, it's about endurance. How the Night King strolls in like the Grim Reaper coming to collect his debt. That all these characters and their journeys and their battles have not prepared them for the fear that we all have, the thing that awaits us all and... So, the Night King went out like a punk, didn't he? 8 seasons of build-up. The threat that started the show. Taken out in episode 3. I was one of the people who subscribed to r/Night King Wins the Throne, so you can imagine my reaction when the Army of the Dead got mothershipped. Now, is destroying the Army of the Dead early on to focus on other conflicts inherently bad? Of course not. There's even a bitter irony to it, that the heroes become the monsters that they tried to save the world from. The foundation is solid, where it goes makes sense, and even then, boy is it anticlimactic. Subverting expectations has become a bit of a meme in film criticism in the last couple of years, the idea of throwing everything out the window and embracing surprise. The truth is that subverting audience and story expectations is one of the keys to compelling drama. Every great story has its curveballs. At this point in time, the Russo brothers are the most beloved directors in the blockbuster sphere, and they are masters of subverting audience expectations. I covered this in my video on Civil War, and they do it just as well in Endgame, specifically in the first act. As it stands, the Night King's demise is tied to Arya's journey. Through a retconned Melisandre quote, they turn this into some sort of prophecy or destiny thing, and... sure. Logistically, the moment going to Arya certainly makes the most sense. Through her training in Season 6, she is the only character properly equipped to fight in complete darkness. Arya's shenanigans in the library are clearly meant to establish this moment, how she hides and adapts to the Army of the Dead, being able to pass by without being noticed. However, much like the rest of this episode, this solid idea is not done justice by its execution. If the trope that this moment is subverting is that the main hero must defeat the main villain, and we establish that this should be Jon's moment, not having Jon there for the subversion is... odd. Jon being overwhelmed or disarmed by the Night King in front of Bran, or having to play any part in the showdown, certainly would have smoothed things over. If Jon were the bait for Arya's sneak attack, the scene could have been given a sense of anticipation and dread, as we wonder whether Jon can stay alive, or if Arya can get the kill. If they'd followed Arya's actions up until this final strike, I guarantee you that everyone's heart would have stopped as she's grabbed by the Night King, only to be relieved when she delivers the final blow. Simply put, the scene doesn't really establish expectations to subvert. I mean, Arya literally appears out of thin air. By prioritizing this moment of surprise, the Night King and his connection to the story are robbed of their meaning. The Night King sort of represents the endpoint to Arya's defined storyline, but neither she nor any of the other characters are particularly changed by this encounter. Villains mean something. Villain deaths especially mean something. They are the fears and obstacles that the heroes must overcome to complete their journeys. The heroes don't even need to know the villain before this moment, as long as what the villain symbolizes is made clear.
I am no man.
Ultimately, the Night King is not the main antagonist to this story. That honor goes to the throne, to which Daenerys becomes its conduit. They're a red herring, a story catalyst, yet they still should have story significance. Can you subvert expectations this hard? Can you shift gears this late into a story and completely change your villain? In all the ways the Night King's death doesn't work, Snoke's death in The Last Jedi does.
I want every gun we have to fire on that man.
Now, I understand that Snoke's death is equally controversial, mostly due to his ambiguity in Episode 7. But if you'll allow me, I believe I can share how The Last Jedi could have improved The Long Night. First, let's go over how this scene establishes expectations. A lot of the conflict in Last Jedi centers around our heroes trying to prevent history from repeating itself, and here we're given a blast from the past, with a scene that directly mirrors the climactic showdown in Return of the Jedi. The characters in this scene, Ben, Snoke, and Rey, are direct analogs of Vader, the Emperor, and Luke respectively. Through this connection, the audience creates expectations for how we think the scene will play out. Rey and Ben will find themselves in some sort of duel, and Ben will be conflicted between his connection to Rey and his commitment to Snoke. We, as the audience, understand that Ben can be redeemed if he overcomes Snoke, and the film up until this point has portrayed Ben very sympathetically. By making this comparison nearly identical, the moments where the scene veers from Return become even more startling. For one, the scene skips past all the iconic beats from the original throne room and just kills Snoke unceremoniously. Where the Emperor's death was heroic and self-sacrificing, Snoke's death is deceptive and cold. If you haven't revisited the film in a while, I urge you to go back and just pay attention to Driver's performance, how he commands the scene through his posture and his stare. At every moment in the scene, he's waiting for his moment to strike. After Rey and Ben dispose of Snoke's guards, we, alongside Rey, come to the realization that Ben didn't turn for the better. Okay, so why does killing Snoke halfway through the story work? Well, first off, Snoke was never an interesting character. Circus plays the hell out of him, but he's only ever smoke and mirrors, a villain reminiscent of the types of villain we're used to in this fantasy series. I think this is largely why the death matters, that Rian Johnson exposes the flawed nature of generic menacing villains. And this is on top of shifting the corruption of Ben from Snoke's influence to Luke's failing as a teacher. But even more important, the reason why this scene works is because it's not about Snoke. It's about Ben and Rey. For Rey, this scene is a lesson in how she can't just do what her idols did and expect the same outcome. In order for a character to make a difference in the story, she'll have to find her own identity. For Ben, he manages to strive higher than his idol ever could. The move that redeemed Vader turns into the move that cements Ben as this series' villain. In one cruel stroke, the film gets rid of its standard boring antagonist and ushers in a far more dynamic villain that has a deeper connection to our protagonists. Now granted, this story isn't over yet, so there's a possibility that The Rise of Skywalker does nothing interesting with this setup. But still, the foundation is there, the opportunity to tell a more impactful story. This is the key to all great subversion. It creates new opportunities for compelling drama. One of the miracles that Game of Thrones pulled off in its early run is how it killed off its most vicious villain Joffrey in only the second episode of its 4th season. The reason why this death works is because it causes tension for Tyrion, with him being framed for his murder. Furthermore, it leaves the doors open for Tywin to step up as the villain of the season, and really the first 4 seasons honestly. Through Tyrion's trial, we see how Joffrey's rash and impulsive spite pales in comparison to Tywin's cold and calculated evil. So back to the Night King. Back to the end of The Long Night. Why does this scene fail as a subversion? Well, the answer is in what follows. Less than 2 full episodes from this moment, Daenerys will be turning King's Landing into the world's largest barbecue, and there is nothing, I repeat, nothing in this episode that remotely establishes this action. Without a doubt, the biggest missed opportunity of this entire season is how they don't tie Daenerys' downfall in King's Landing to her victory in Winterfell. Battles are stories. They are change catalysts for its characters. Whether it's a clever man becoming a war hero, a steward becoming a commander, or 2 warring factions learning to work together in the face of death, battles are defined by their change. As much as I may try, I can't critique this battle on its own. It's a piece to a larger puzzle, and the biggest critique is that it doesn't exactly fit. Despite their importance to the story, this battle isn't really about Daenerys or Jon. Yes, they receive their losses, but these aren't the turning points towards the decisions they make later in this season. Instead, the 4th episode has to be crammed with a mountain of contrived escalation for these characters to become compromised. If this season really wanted to hurt Daenerys, if they really wanted her to break bad, you know what would be colder than Cersei killing Missandei? It would be Missandei needlessly dying in the crypts and Cersei having done nothing to prevent it. It would be Daenerys losing everything in this great war while the rest of the world stood back and secured their comfort. This wouldn't be about morals anymore, this would become personal. If King's Landing was able to sit out on winter, then she would have to bring winter to them.